So today we're on the rock press and we have a 7-color design. In that design, we are going to be using the new Wilflex Rio ready for use screen printing inks. We are going to be printing this design very similar to how you would print a sim process design. We have a white base with a halftone variable underlay. It's going to end up coming out real sweet. And then we're printing spot colors on top through 230 mesh. And we want to show you just how well the ready for use Rio spot colors are going to work. Follow us along and we're going to get this set up. We're going to show you some awesome prints at the end. As always, whenever you get a new bucket of ink, the first time you use it, you want to make sure that ink is well modulated. And that simply means stirring it up before you put it in the screen. While there are recommendations for mesh types, we'd like to see 158 through 230 mesh for your most common types of printing with spot colors. Remember, there's no limitation on what you can use. If you need to print your design through an 86 mesh, do it. So a simplified way of thinking about Squeegee Durometer is the softer the squeegee blade, the thicker your ink deposit. So as you go up in the numbers on a squeegee from a 60 to a 70 to an 80, or the numbers in between, a 65, 90, 65, a 75, or a 70, 90, 70, the higher the number, the better the control you have over your ink deposit. So low number, thicker ink deposit. High number, thinner ink deposit that is therefore easier to control. And where that becomes important is when you start working with detail, and specifically with either fine line detail or high LPI halftone printing. Typically that's going to be when you're doing something like sim process. And that's where you're going to pull out, like on a rock squeegee, a 75 durometer, or you're going to replace that 75 with a 70, 90, 70. Or whatever works for you after you've tested numerous blades and you have that control that you need for your printing. Here's a tip for new auto users. As that squeegee comes up and does its first print stroke, there's typically no ink in the way to lubricate that squeegee. And what it can do is it can cause a little bit of distortion as it pulls itself across the mesh when it's dry. So there's two things you can do. One is to put a bead of ink at the top of the screen so that when the squeegee comes down, it's immediately lubricated by the ink. The other thing you can do is to actually place ink on the back of the squeegee blade as you're adding ink into your screen. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to confirm pressure. We're going to confirm squeegee depth. The more squeegee depth I give it, the more that pressure is going to go down to its maximum point. Squeegee depth on a rock basically gives you a maximum point where that squeegee can go down, basically the squeegee bend that you get. So what we're seeing on some of the registration marks between the top and the bottom can be relayed by how that squeegee was not entirely lubricated across the whole blade. So there can be some pull, which causes some mesh distortion, which is why it's really important for that first squeegee pull that it is well lubricated. So because there's no back registration, all movement is done up here in the print head. I need to take a look at having this go over, having this go down, but then I need to kind of rotate it this way. So I need to pull up a little bit on this. So I'm using the three-point system that we have here in the print head to create a little bit of rotation in the screen. So you can see how that flood went pretty quick. And this is also one of those print heads that we're still dialing back in. So we could be a little bit lower on our back flood. This is where that variable underbase really comes into play. You can see that the red is a giant, it's one solid print. But with the variable underbase, we're printing both direct to the shirt and on top of a small portion of white, giving us this variable color, and as a result, a little bit of a distressed look, but we're getting nice solid coverage. So it looks like we need to move our registration over to the left a little bit, and I think that's about it for the image. And we can see here that it's not shearing as well as we want, partly because, again, the ink is cold. There's a reason we're still wearing our hoodies. So once that gets warm, then it'll shear very nicely. Looks like the green needs to come up just a little bit and to the left. That seems to be a consistent theme. To the left, to the left. So at a certain point when you're doing registration, if you're not putting tape over your registration marks and then wiping them clean, all the color on top of your registration marks is going to start to get muddy. So you start to be able to lose that visual for, is it lining up where it needs to be? I mean, you can solve that by flashing and a few other things. So this is our shirt and what it looks like after one squeegee pull, or two, on each screen. We did our basic registration. Now what our next step is to pull this shirt off. Specifically, we're going to warm this platen back up again, print on the back of the shirt, and then I'm just going to run the press in automatic mode. I'm not going to do the individual color because we believe we're pretty close for registration, and then do a check at the end of that print and see if anything looks like it's out of register. The design itself is slightly loose in terms of, does it need to have real tight registration? We've got a little wiggle room, and I'm going to work with that on this design. So this is the manual function to warm up a platen. Before we actually run production, we would set the auto up to run so that all the platens get warm up. But it's 50 degrees here on our mezzanine, and I want my platen warm before I actually run. It goes hand in hand with warming up the inks. All inks perform better when they're warm. There's our smoothing screen. And now each color will print a single flood print. The only reason why we're seeing a delay in the press right now is because all the other platens are cold, and it's designed right now as we run where the sensor on the flash is controlling the speed of the press. So as each platen hits specified temperature, then it will progress one more print head. So we have very small bumps to do. Red needs to go over a little bit, down just a little bit. Gold is good. Blue is pretty darn close. Looks like I need to bump the blue down just a little bit. We can see a small gap there. So specifically what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at how colors are fall because the registration marks are covered. It's hard to see each one individually. And I'm staring at where some of the color overlap is happening. It's an old school way of approaching what we're doing here. This looks mostly like it's royal blue on top of a color, so I'm looking at needing to tweak the royal blue a little bit more. My green just needs to come this way. It looks like I overcompensated a little bit last time from the bump. Our gold looks pretty good. And again, because this design is so blocky, I can come around and just look at where the design is, where the blocks of color are falling. And as you saw in our design, all the colors falling on top of this halftone underbase, the variable underbase of the white, that's a solid block of red falling on top of there. So the registration is very straightforward. We're just moving Lego blocks around a little bit to the left, to the right, up or down. So the royal blue needs to go that way just a little bit. Some of you may be wondering, what is this yellow sheet that's here on the platen? This is called print grip, and this is very similar to what water-based adhesive is, except for it's in a sheet form. This is sticky. I don't know if you can get a good close-up of my skin wanting to pull away from my body when I do this, or this is a fantastic alternative to applying a water-based adhesive. We use a single strip of the print grip in its place. If you're printing on a standard cotton shirt, it works just as well as water-based adhesive. But when you end up going to a more fashion-like product, anything that has a softer feel, that may have a silicone coating or another coating in order to create an extra softness in that fabric. That kind of fabric doesn't want to stick to water-based glue very well. In our testing, we got nearly double the amount of shirts per run before we had to apply water and scrub off the lint, just like you do with standard water-based adhesive. So this is a great alternative for those who are looking for a solution to grab onto those more challenging substrates to get a longer run out of them. and again, as a single stop solution for all your garments. We can see that the squeegee itself looks like it needs to be sharpened, but because the ink is warm, we're getting a better shear out of it. That goes back to always making sure that your inks are warm and production ready before you really start printing. As this green prints, you can see how the red ink has transferred to the back of the screen. This is completely normal in wet-on-wet printing. This is not technically buildup. Ink buildup can have a couple of definitions depending on how you're using it. We're getting some ink film buildup split on the back of the screen, but it's still wet. If we were to scrape that off perfectly, it'd still be usable ink. So if we're talking about buildup on the back of the screen, it's usually a sticky substance, very solid, and that is a negative. That means that the ink you're using is not formulated for wet-on-wet printing. And that is something you shouldn't be using on a regular basis for printing wet-on-wet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to speed up that print stroke just a little bit. If your mesh tension is fairly low, we're talking sub 21, 18, maybe a little lower. As you change your squeegee speed and or your pressure, you might notice a little bit of a change in the size of your print. You can have some elongation of your mesh. So it's always something to pay attention to check your screens with regularity for tension with a tension meter. We're talking about newtons. And make sure that everything you're printing is consistent within 1 to 2 newtons of each other. While we encourage you to always use higher tension screens, we're talking close to 25, that can be a challenge to keep in stock and to keep that tension levels with any kind of regularity, consistency across all your screens. Just be consistent. Start where you can. Increase or build your higher tension screen catalog as you can. We were talking about the variable underbase that we're using for that white base, where it's a lot of little dots and it's, brighter white points, darker points. And then we have this solid red printing over it. This is 100% solid. There's no halftones or fades in this red. It's all that underbase that's taking care of that tonal difference in the print. It's something that you see commonly used when you're printing sim process. While we can't technically call this sim process because we're not blending colors together to create, 2, 3, 4 extra colors, and we're not recreating art in that manner, slight defining of the term sim process, you can still create amazing effects, great simulations of what the design could be just by adjusting your underbase and then flat color on top, and it's still going to be absolutely amazing, and you're going to have great color integrity as a result. There are 3 main presses as of this statement on the market. There's M&R, which has the aluminum platens with the rubber top, and then there's MHM and Rock. Rock and MHM, I'm going to flip those around a few times, have the honeycomb platens, which heat up quickly, but lose heat quickly. So it's a double-edged sword. Where the M&R, those are a bit more, they take a little longer to warm up, but then they hold that temperature for a long time. So when you need to stop, and invariably you will need to stop to do something on your press, those platens are going to start to cool down. And being able to pick right back up into production means that on the honeycomb platens, you need to move with certainty and speed and efficiency. If you're on an M&R, you can have a little bit extra time because of how the platens are built. They will hold that temperature. But as far as temperature control, also, it's very important. Again, those rocks will get to temperature quickly, and then you need to control that temperature quickly. Production temperature start, when you're running with plastisol, bare minimum to start is 120 degrees. And when you're running in production, we like to see maintained temperatures between 140 and 150. The reality is we know a lot of you are going to get closer to 160. But when you can, if you have an individual on your production floor who can come around and float and check temperatures, have them micromanage your flashes. It's really important, and it's more important than you realize. The quality of your prints at the end of those sessions where that individual was micromanaging what the temperature is on your platens and your inks, you'll see better quality. These aren't meant to be super high opacity inks. You know, there's a point in how you chemically make an ink where a certain pigment load is just not good for wet-on-wet printing. The Wilflex inks for an RFU color, these are at that medium to high opacity depending on the color. Remember, this isn't something like, you know, historically you look at the max opaque inks as being very high opacity, but those max opaque inks were not designed for wet-on-wet printing. They get that buildup, that physical buildup on the back of the screens that then causes issues with your prints. You know, for off-the-shelf inks, these hit the mark exactly the way we needed them to. They performed exactly the way we needed them to. Easy to use, wet-on-wet went great. You're running 230 mesh, single stroke on all the colors. And as you can see, print turned out great. Printed straight out of the bucket, 230 mesh, single stroke, wet on wet. Check the links below for additional resources for you to check out. As always, if you have questions on how we did this or you want to know more about Rio RFU ready to use inks, reach out to us. We're more than happy to talk to you at any time.